Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman here, as always, with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, I'm getting into the rhythm of covering the college football playoff. We find out who Ohio State's playing, and we immediately start watching a bunch of their old games. Did it with Tennessee. Now we're doing it with Oregon. We have a little bit of a head start with Oregon, having already watched the Ohio State-Oregon game pretty up close, and then also watched the Oregon-Michigan game. So now we're moving on and to cover the last three games of their season. That starts in lovely Madison, Wisconsin, on a game that did not go great for Oregon, but they're, spoiler alert, they end the season number 1 and undefeated heading into the playoff. So I don't want to ruin anything, Tony, but they do end up winning this game.
I will ruin it. They win it 16-13, Tom. It's,
No.
sorry. But in terms of rewatching and learning from what we've seen from Oregon, I did re-upload our what we learned from watching Oregon beat Ohio State. I uploaded that to the Buckeye Weekly podcast feed. So that was back from October 15th or 16th or whatever, 17th. And you can get our immediate-ish reaction from rewatching that game. This is, of course, our immediate reaction from rewatching a game that we listened to on the radio coming back from Chicago from the Northwestern game and watching it live, Tom. This reminded me of a game that you had, listened to the radio because it was kind of a game that existed before television. It was kind of ugly a little bit. It was Wisconsin really, as we know, can ugly up a game, and that includes their own offense. And my first takeaway watching this is there's just no offensive threat from Wisconsin, and yet, in terms of the passing game, and yet they were still able to move the ball. They were still able to run the ball, and that's not a great sign for a defense when you're able to run against them with no real passing threat. And when you look at Ohio State's passing threat, if they can run, they should be able to run better or run some. And if they can't, if they can only run as well as Wisconsin, they certainly should be able to throw better than the Badgers. But I was a little surprised that Wisconsin was able to run the ball like they did at times, especially I think in the second quarter. But they scored 10 points in the second quarter and went to the half with a 10-6 lead in this one.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember listening to this game some, and I just remembered it was close. But you go into a game and the final score is 16-13. You're like, boy, I bet I'm going to learn some not good things about the Oregon offense. But the Oregon defense, I bet, looks great. And then you turn it on and it's like, well, I feel like I maybe have more concerns with the Oregon defense than the Oregon offense coming out of this game. The offense, I think we have to start this whole conversation with. There was no Jordan Birch, defensive end, for Oregon. He missed the Ohio State game as well. No Tez Johnson, who is their leading receiver. He comes out of the slot and is by far their leading receiver. That's a big loss, and I think they felt his absence in this one. But yeah, the way Wisconsin was able to run the ball eventually, they started out trying to ram the ball between the tackles, and it was like, no, this is not going to work, not even a little bit. Whoa, you're telling me Phil Longo gets fired? Wow. Based on what? Why would you possibly? So they started slow, but yeah, things opened up in the run game, despite the fact that there was like no passing attack whatsoever. I think Wisconsin threw for 90 yards in the game total, which is, that's like a drive and a half for Ohio State. That's I think a little bit of a concern because the Wisconsin offensive line is not any great shakes this year either. They have been, you think of Wisconsin as well. They're going to line up. They've got a bunch of 330-pound guys who grew up on dairy farms, and they're just going to maul you. And that's not what Wisconsin is anymore. That probably should be what Wisconsin is based on how things are going for Wisconsin right now, but that's not what Wisconsin is right now. But they were still able to run the ball. A lot of stuff, getting out on the edge, just, some creative things. And it wasn't, this wasn't that they're running up and down the field on Oregon by any means, but Oregon's run defense is not great. They're kind of like middle of the pack in FBS in terms of rushing yards per attempt allowed. Ohio State is in the top 5, I think they were in the top 5. Oregon was, Ohio State allows less than 3 yards per carry. Oregon allows about 4 yards per carry. And it's just 1 yard per carry. How much of a difference does that make? Well, that's the difference between the top 5 and like, I think they were 50th or 60th, something like that in the nation. That's a big difference. And for a team to be able to run the ball without any kind of a credible passing threat, that, Jordan Birch or not, that's something that I kind of look at and go, huh.
It was interesting. And like you said, it did take some time. Walker, their running back, rushed for, I think, 97 yards or so on 20-some carries. And that second quarter, he was 8 for 50 with a long of 22 and averaging 6.2 yards a carry. In that second quarter overall, they went for about 65 yards. So roughly half of their rushing yards came in one quarter. So you can kind of write it off. And they did only give up 13 points. But Tom, my next point is they could have given up Oregon should have given up more in this one if Wisconsin had the passing ability, the ability to make plays. There was one, and one led to a field goal that was a touchdown pass that was missed by Braden Locke, their quarterback, who is way in over his head in Big Ten football. I don't think it's a terrible thing to say that, but he was put in some rough situations early, a lot of 3rd and longs. But there was one where he had an open receiver in the end zone, threw it over his head that led to a field goal. There was another one where he made a play, scrambled in the red zone, threw it left-handed, and he is not left-handed, but he threw a touchdown pass on 3rd down, left-handed, and there was a lineman downfield. There were actually 2 linemen downfield because it looked like he was going to run because he had tucked the ball, and he's like, you know what? I'm just going to throw it. And again, threw it left-handed for a score, had to take that touchdown off the board. That was 8 points right there. That would have been nice to have in a 3-point loss, even though Oregon had the ball at the end and would have been able to do something with it. But Wisconsin left some points on the board because, one, they didn't have the offensive talent to get them, but also they did have opportunities and they couldn't capitalize either. And the passing game, 12 for 28 for Braden Locke, 96 yards. Oregon did a really, really good job. But also, I don't know that you need to do a really, really good job to make this Wisconsin passing game look bad.
No, they did that plenty fine on their own. There were a lot of throws behind guys. I think you mentioned the throw in the end zone where there was a running back and the 2 guys collided and and it was like, all you have to do is drop that in the bucket. And that was a real bad miss. There were just a couple things that were, real opportunities where they just didn't capitalize on it. And you figure Ohio State's probably going to capitalize on more of those. It was, like I said, a concern. And there was one downfield shot that they hit. I'm trying to find which secondary guy it was on. Dante Manning, number 8. They took one long shot right before halftime and got him for a long one. It wasn't, the coverage wasn't bad, but it wasn't great. And you're kind of getting graded on a curve. It's like, well, Iowa only hit this one big play on you with their offense. It's like, oh boy, one? Jeez, that's not great. And Oregon is not an amazing big play defense. Ohio State has given up 9 plays of 30 yards or more this season. That's best in the country. Oregon has given up 20. So you can get them down the field sometimes. And, I think I definitely did not go back and look at how many of those 9 plays of 30 plus yards were in the Oregon game, but probably a decent percentage were. So, that may be a stat that, or if it works great for Ohio State most of the time, and then not so much in this one. So, all right. So that's a good start, at least on the Oregon defense. I want to swing over to the Oregon offense a little bit. And, Tez Johnson not being there certainly impacts the Oregon offense quite a bit. That's one of their big weapons. And their passing attack is very close to the line of scrimmage, almost always. Asterisk offer not valid in the first Ohio State game this season. They took a couple shots downfield, more than we had seen them take prior to that Ohio State game. They take a couple shots downfield, but it's not, they don't connect on didn't connect on a huge percentage of them in this game. But the Oregon passing attack, so much of it in this game revolved around tight end Terrence Ferguson. He wears number 3. You probably remember him from the first Ohio State game. He is very, very effective downfield. And a couple of the downfield shots they took were to him. You don't think of the big 250-pound tight end being the guy who you're throwing it to 25, 30 yards down the hash. He was someone they threw to a couple of times. At one point, he was open and he either stumbled over his own feet or tripped over a seam in the rug or something. But he was open deep and just didn't reel it in. He's someone who is, Ohio State had to deal with Tyler Warren against Penn State. He is someone, Ferguson, who is going to be a guy to watch, because if you add Tez Johnson back in there and you have Ferguson and you have Evan Stewart, this is probably the deepest group of wide receivers and pass catchers overall that Ohio State has faced all season, and then they're going to have to do it again. This is going to put a lot of strain on the Ohio State secondary, because they have played a lot of teams that do not have great passing attacks. And, even Tennessee, we talked about it. Like, yeah, they've got guys, but they're not particularly impressive. Evan Stewart had a big first game against Ohio State. Terrence Ferguson is a real threat. Tez Johnson is a real threat. They're going to this is going to be a lot more pressure on the Ohio State secondary than they've faced in quite a while.
So I'm just trying to bring up the stat broadcast from the Ohio State-Oregon game. The number of big plays in that game that Ohio State, so they've given up 9 in this season of 30 yards or more. They gave up 7 in October, Tom. I'm about to find out how many of those 7 were against Oregon, and oh no, Tom, it's all 7, and they're all it's horrible, Tom. No, they gave it. This is a 28-yarder. So these are pass plays of 15, but of the 30-yard plays, they gave up a 69-yarder, a 32-yard reception, a 48-yard reception, and a 32. So 4 of those 7, 4 of the 9 came against Oregon. And that doesn't include a 28-yard reception, a 27-yard rush, a 25-yard rush, a 26-yard reception in that Oregon game as well. So not a great job by the Ohio State defense. 10 plays of what they consider big plays, which is a rush of 10 yards or more or a pass play of 15 yards or more. But that's a different game, Tom. Back to this game, and not just with Terrence Ferguson downfield. They will throw screens to him. We know that. And he's good after the catch. And he's not the only tight end that they have. Sadiq is another one who has had some good moments this season and is an effective and athletic receiver. So you're going to have to tackle, as we know, and Ohio State will have a different plan of attack than they did the last time. They have to. You mentioned the Stewart, and he had 149 yards in that game against Ohio State. And I believe he's had about, 260 yards in all of the games since. So
he's 48 catches, 613 yards, 5 touchdowns on the season. So 613 on the season. He had 149 against Ohio State. He had 10 catches for 92 yards in this one, including, it was like 6 receptions by the middle of the first quarter. It was like, I stopped my rewatch to pull up the stats to go, he didn't catch like 30 passes in this game, did he? No, it was only 10, which is still quite a bit.
Yeah. And they're deep. And the thing with their receiving core is any one of those guys would probably be the lead receiver on any of the teams Ohio State has played since then. Yeah, I mean, you can look at Nebraska, Penn State, Purdue, Northwestern, Indiana, Michigan, Tennessee. Any of their 3 or 4 guys would be the number 1 guy on all those teams that Ohio State has played. So now you've got to face them again, and getting Tez Johnson back, having him back now for the last few games is key as well. And they've got to tackle all of them, but not just tackle them. Now they know they have to cover them deep. And in this game, there were some deep shots, but Dillon Gabriel was not accurate. I think in the first half, he was maybe 1 for 3, 0 for his first 2. Where you're just throwing it up and trusting your receivers, and it wasn't necessarily effective. So I'll be interested to see how much they continue to go downfield against Ohio State, because I think they know they have to. You've got to attack Ohio State's aggressiveness. Part of attacking any aggressiveness is the way Dillon Gabriel in this game and others is just so annoying to try and tackle and trying to bring him down. It reminds me of when I was a kid watching John Elway. Like, you can never sack that guy. He's not the arm. It's not any of that. It's just his escapability. And now it's kind of probably like watching Patrick Mahomes, where it's like you're watching your team. You're like, I wish I wish somebody would tackle John Elway, but nobody can. And then he makes a play. And Dillon Gabriel, he's just really calm and poised. Dan Lanning said it on his teleconference. It doesn't matter the time or the distance to score. He's always the same guy. And that was the case. And he was getting pressured quite a bit in this one. And that's not just from blitzes, but that's also from the edges, from the edge rushers, and also from the interior. So he was getting pressured. And there were times where he would just go down. I'm like, okay, I've lost this one. I'm not going to make a dumb play. I'm just going to go down. And we've got 2 or 3 more plays to try and figure this out. So he's smart. But again, Tom, we saw in this one, he did throw another interception in the red zone.
He did, and that was one where he threw behind the receiver, and the guy kind of reached back to try and get it, and it went straight up in the air, and one of the Wisconsin corners picked it off. It wasn't. We watched the Michigan State game, so I guess we've actually now watched 3 full Oregon games before this one. And that one, he threw a couple red zone interceptions, and those were just like, that was a terrible decision. This was just, the guy was open, he just threw it behind him. It was bad execution rather than a bad decision. The result is the same, but it's probably a little bit of a different concern. We just spent 3 weeks talking about Nico Iamaleava, the Tennessee quarterback, and how he can extend plays with his legs and throw the ball downfield and all that kind of stuff. And Dillon Gabriel feels like, you remember in Back to the Future where Biff goes back in time and talks to young Biff and is like, listen, you got to read the sports almanac. Like, I feel like Dillon Gabriel could be the future Nico Iamaleava and go back in time and be like, listen, kid, you got to learn to slide. Sometimes you got to just go to the ground and not take a million hits. Gabriel he does the same stuff that can drive you crazy in terms of extending plays and making you cover for a long time and all that kind of stuff. But he doesn't take unnecessary risks. He's not winging the ball into triple coverage because it's like, he doesn't throw the YOLO balls that Iamaleava did at times. He's very smart with what he does. He's very crafty. He can get, he's not a 6'6", like incredible athletic specimen. He's probably, I stood next to him at Big Ten Media Days, and I don't know if he's listed at 6 feet, but I don't think he's 6 feet tall. He does not have all the physical gifts that Iamaleava does, but he does have an incredible Rolodex of college football and defenses and coverages in his head. He has kind of seen it all. And to your point on, not freaking out in big moments, there was a play where it was 4th and 9 at the plus 41, at the Wisconsin 41. They're down 13-6, first play of the 4th quarter. So 4th and 9, the numbers probably do not say go for it there. And we'll get to Dan Lanning's 4th down decision-making in a minute because I did want to talk about that. But Lanning, 4th and 9 at the plus 41, Wisconsin has just gone down the field and really dragged out most of the 3rd quarter on one drive. So this is kind of a high-risk, high-reward play. And Lanning decides to go for it. And Gabriel finds Terrence Ferguson in a tight window. It was not an easy throw. It was a tight window that he found him in, but they pick it up. Then Jordan James scored the touchdown 3 or 4 plays later, and boom, they tie the game and end up going on to win. That is I really trust you kind of play. And you can understand why Dan Lanning trusts Dillon Gabriel so much. There were multiple mentions of how Dillon Gabriel and Terrence Ferguson are like best friends, and so this is the new Austin Mack and Dwayne Haskins are roommates. You're gonna hear that on a bunch of these games as you go through the season. But yeah, that's one thing to talk about. And then the other thing I want to kind of transition into Dan Lanning's 4th down decision making, because we just spent 2 weeks, 3 weeks talking about Josh Heupel, and boy, this guy's really conservative in some of these moments. Dan Lanning does not give a crap. Dan Lanning is going to go for it. It is 4th and 9, plus 41. YOLO, let's go for it. It is, I knew the final score was 16-13, and then Oregon's lining up for a field goal in the last minute or, minute and a half, something like that left. And I'm like, well, I've already looked up the stats, and he doesn't miss any more field goals in this game. So how did this not, and it's like, oh, a fake. Okay. And it was 4th and 4 at the, 15-yard line, give or take. And you're up 3, so field goal turns it into 6. So you're not going to get a touchdown beats you either way, but a field goal doesn't do Wisconsin any good. And they decide, you know what, I'm going to fake it, going to try and just kill the game right here. Didn't make it, but it's like, that was very aggressive. I admire the give it a shot, take it, see what you can do. One thing that is I watched the last thing right before halftime. They lined up in what sure looked like a victory formation, kneel down, just get out of the half formation, and then handed it to a running back, and he picked up, 10 yards or so. They didn't end up getting anything out of it. But I looked at that, and I was remembering when Greg Schiano was with the Tampa Bay Bucks, and they were like diving at people's knees in the, when they were in the victory formation, and people talking about how bush league it is. It's like, that's great. That's a very creative play call. You don't get to complain about people going hard when you're in victory formation, because you've now shown it's like the old Kenny Pickett when he was at Pitt and he was going to like do the fake slide. Like, okay, if you're going to do the fake slide and then score a touchdown on it, that's fine. The next time you look like you're going to slide, you don't get to cry if I, come up and absolutely run straight through you. Kind of the same thing there. I don't know. We have not gone through the rest of the games, but I looked at that and I thought, that probably seems like a good idea, but it might also, lead to future hostilities at some point in another game.
Well, yeah, and it may lead to a 15-yard penalty against your opponent, but it also may lead to an injury to an offensive lineman or something like that, who is not expecting to have to defend his knee or anything like that. But it was interesting, and that's kind of just the epitome of Dan Lanning. And sometimes it works, and sometimes it loses you games against Washington. And he's had that happen now a couple of times, and where you want to remain aggressive, but there's a time and a place, and sometimes some aggression is unnecessary. That one, in terms of the fake field goal, that was one we were listening to. You were watching, I think, on Stat Broadcast in the backseat of the car, and we're listening to it, and you kind of got quiet, and it's like, well, what's happening? And the Stat Broadcast is almost real time. Listening to it in the car via the satellite is you're almost a minute behind, and you're like, oh, just wait, because I think I said something like, what's Dan Lanning going to do here? And you're like, oh, just wait. And we did. And again, I had kind of forgotten about that one as well. It's hard to fault somebody for wanting to just seal it, but also there are better ways to seal it. But if it works, again, Dan Lanning is a genius, and we all remember the genius. We don't remember the failures. It's the Thomas Edison and all of the failed inventions, all of the failed ways to do things. We only remember him for like a light bulb, and we don't, we forget that he tried to put out there like a two-legged stool. Like, what an idiot, right? But I digressed. Wisconsin also dropped an interception in this one where a bad throw by Gabriel. Oregon won this. They were the better team. There are ways that Wisconsin could have put up a much better fight and forced Oregon to play better, and Oregon probably would have played better and still done what they needed to do. But Wisconsin left some opportunities out there, and a dropped interception that with nobody in front of the defender could have, if he would have stayed up, could have been a pick six in a very important game. I thought overall this was a really, really disciplined Wisconsin defense, and it worked well against what Oregon was doing. Now, it's Oregon, so they're going to move the ball and they're going to get their yards. But it was, I believe it was their lowest yards per play of the season as I try to scramble and get through there. Certainly lower than it was against Ohio State this season, when I believe Oregon averaged, about 10 yards a play. They averaged 7.6 yards a play against Ohio State, and against Wisconsin it was 4.99. So 5 yards a play was their season low. The only time they've been held that low, under 5.5 yards a game or a play. And as I said, contrast that to the 7.6 yards per play against Ohio State. This is a disciplined, well-tackling defense that Ohio State is going to have to mirror in terms of execution and being in the right places, being at the right times, but then making the plays that are available to you. Wisconsin did that relatively well. Jordan James, Oregon running back, rushes for 121 yards on 25 carries, 4.8 yards a carry, long of just 14. But it was consistent, and they made Oregon work for it. And I think that's the key. If you make Oregon work for it, they may still get some of those yards. But in this one, just 354 yards of total offense, and they had to earn everything they got, and it led to them scoring 16 points.
Yeah, and I at one point thought, boy, Jordan James looks great running the ball, and then it just felt like offensive coordinator Will Stein forgot about him for a little bit, and then you look and he finished with 25 carries, so maybe, you know, it felt like, boy, they were running really well early, and then they got away from it, got a little pass happy, and it just didn't really work very well, and then when they went back to him, he was just very consistent, like you said. 4.8 yards per carry on a long of 14 is genuinely impressive. That tells me you're getting a lot of 4s and 5s because you're not getting that average skewed by a 50-yarder. That is just a lot of 3s and 4s and 5s, and he is a tough guy to bottle up in the backfield. And the run blocking was not incredible, but it was solid for Oregon. The only thing that really jumped out to me about the Oregon offensive line that was a negative was the pass pro. Right tackle Johnny Cornelius was not great in this game. There was the left tackle, Josh Connerly, get called for a holding penalty at one point. I thought that was a little ticky-tack, but he did give up a speed rusher on the edge. Cornelius there were a couple where it was like, boy, that was a really obvious hold right at the point of attack that didn't get called, that probably gets called sometimes. We should talk about the officiating at some point later in this game, which was just an absolute disaster. I think Oregon may have brought the Pac-12 refs with them to the Big Ten. I'm not sure. But the offensive line for Oregon is good, but not amazing. They are they're a solid group, but they don't run for a ton. They are 48th in the country in yards per carry at 4.7, which is, that's fine, but it's not amazing. Ohio State, just for comparison's sake, 29th in the country, 4.9. So it's a quarter of a yard. How big of a difference is it? Not enormous, but it adds up over time. And I think Oregon is, when I look at a right tackle struggling some with Wisconsin's defensive ends and the left tackle to a certain degree, I think, boy, we just saw this with Jack Sawyer and a somewhat shaky right tackle. And Cornelius, I think, is probably better than John Campbell, who's the right tackle who was started for Tennessee. But it's still, I don't think Oregon's going in here feeling like, nope, don't need to worry about that at all. This will be just fine. That's one that I think is going to be a matchup maybe to keep an eye on as well in this game.
Ohio State's defensive ends went into the Tennessee game expecting what they did, expecting to do what they did, and seeing and scouting and seeing they had an advantage, and they took advantage of that advantage. This one, I think there'll be similar confidence, but the defense as a whole is also playing at another level right now in terms of their confidence. Now, as we know, Ohio State hasn't played an offense as good as Oregon's since Oregon's, and all of those different parts, and maybe an offensive line as good. I don't know. I probably haven't played an offensive line as good as Oregon's in that stretch. So, what have we learned about Ohio State? As the changes, they've gotten better defensively, but is that just because they haven't played Oregon? And that's the question that we're eventually going to have to get answered. I do think that let's turn to the refs, because I'm looking at my points here, and there was some of these delay of games from the defense, which I didn't understand why it was being called, because I've not seen it called in any other game. The pre-snap shift of the defensive line that we've seen all season long from everybody in this game was viewed as a delay of game by the refs in terms of, it's too late and it's meant to distract or draw a false start. So they were flagging. I don't know if they flagged both teams. I think they got Oregon on this one, but they were just,
they got both. Yeah.
Both. So it's like, that was interesting. And then the rules official that is there in the booth was like, they're consistently wrong. That was, I think the exact quote was, consistently wrong. Like you're employing the rule wrong. And so good job being consistently wrong. If at least you're not biased one way or the other, you're not skewing one way or the other. Another one at the end of the game, calling the chop block on Wisconsin, that on a third down, it was a first down, converted third down pass with, it's a tie game, 13-13, under 7 minutes to go. It wasn't a chop block. They called it a chop block, moves it to third and long, and Wisconsin's going to have to punt. The punt is returned a few yards, but Oregon gets the ball at the Wisconsin 43-yard line with 6:49 to go in a 13-13 game. And you know the result. It ends up with a field goal. But what happens if that call doesn't get made? Does Wisconsin march down the field and score? Probably not. They probably punt from the 45 or the 50 instead, but then they make Oregon work for it rather than just getting the ball and being 10 yards away from a field goal. So not a great day for the officials. No, Oregon fans, that is not why Oregon won this game and Wisconsin lost. But they need to make sure that they're calling things correctly in terms of the rules. And then also that was a costly penalty for Wisconsin on that chop block. That was a big play in a game that was going to come down to a couple of big plays because of how low scoring it was.
Yeah, we have over the, I think, weeks figured out that the best way to have a conversation about the officiating is if the guy who is the professional ref on TV goes, yeah, man, they screwed that one up, then we can officially safely mention it, and it will not be us going, well, that's not what we would have done. There was another one that was weird where Derek Harmon was in the middle of the defensive line and got called for holding the offensive lineman, which is like some real strong, like Ron Cherry, we have an unusual ruling vibes. Like this whole game was, we have an unusual ruling, and usually it's not correct. So not exactly what you're looking for out of officials, but it is what it is. Oregon did use some tempo. We saw a lot of teams using tempo against Tennessee over the span of times, the span of games that we watched. Oregon used a decent amount of tempo, and it wasn't, normally you think, okay, you pick up a first down and then you do it. There was one where they picked up like a yard or two on the ground and then snapped it with like 30 seconds left on the play clock. There was one where they did that, and then they showed, it looked like they were running QB power, and then he took, Dillon Gabriel takes a couple steps forward and then like stops, takes a step back, sets, and throws one downfield. Like they kind of did a lot of stuff where, do you remember the 2006 Ohio State Michigan game where Ohio State kind of hustles to the line and they're running this like tight bunch formation and they snap it, and they never ran hurry up back then. And you sort of hustle the line and you're giving the defense something weird and unusual, and they don't have time to like sit there and process it. It's just kind of, okay, well, something's weird going on. And it's like you're at a tight bunch formation and it's like Ted Ginn's lined up as tight end, and then you hit him for a long touchdown pass. It was kind of the same vibes there where you're giving the defense something that's really different and weird looking, but you don't give them time to think about it or process it. It just, you go and that's it. That was, I thought, an interesting thing. You think of Oregon using tempo a ton under Chip Kelly, and they obviously don't run the blur offense there anymore and haven't done that for a long time. But the use of tempo was very effective. When they did do it, it was pretty effective for them. I also do, real quickly, I mentioned Will Stein, offensive coordinator, earlier. I don't know that this is necessarily true all the time, but when he was all bundled up on the sidelines in Madison, he looks a lot like Chris Parnell, who old SNL guy and the guy who voiced one of the characters on Archer. And so every time I looked at him, I just heard Cyril Figgis. And so I don't know. I hope he does not look like that at the Rose Bowl, because otherwise that's going to be very distracting while I'm trying to work.
Also, I believe one of the skits he was in, his teeth were like chalk, so his parents had to chew his food for him and spit into his mouth. And that was an actual skit that they did. And he brought home a girl to meet his parents for the first time, and then so she had to do it. They really get into this stuff. You got to be all in on that stuff. A couple of last things for me. Like one of my notes is that watching the Wisconsin offense and applying it to Ohio State is pointless. Like, what can there's nothing that Wisconsin does that is reminiscent of what Ohio State does. But when you still kind of try to find some similarities or some things that can happen in there. With Wisconsin, they left some plays out there. And if they had a better quarterback, they had better receivers, better offensive line or whatever, there were plays to be made. I still don't know. It'll be interesting to watch the next two games, because you go from this game, which was, not great, to we'll watch the Washington game next. And Dan Lanning called that the most complete performance for his team all year long, offensively, defensively, and special teams. So I'm interested to see the contrast there. But they had a week off between this one and that Washington game, so they fixed some things. Get ready for a rivalry game. Play your absolute best in that rivalry game. But I don't really know much about the secondary at this point. Yeah, we've watched them against Michigan State. We watched them against Ohio State. Nothing in this game told me anything really about the secondary. So I'm interested to find out more about that on, any changes or just reminding myself, because again, we watched plenty of Oregon before that game. Haven't watched much since closely. So I'm looking forward to getting back to seeing what the secondary was about.
Yeah, and I don't want to spoil anything, but Washington is starting a first-time freshman starting quarterback, Damon Williams, in the Oregon game.
Run.
So not going to be an exact corollary to a fifth-year starter like Will Howard, but we'll talk about that next time. I do want to kind of give the Oregon defense some of its flowers here, because there was stuff that they did do very well. Mateo Uiagalelei, defensive end, he just consistently lines up over the right tackle, and Wisconsin's right tackle was not having a very good time trying to block him. A lot of speed rushes around the edge. He at one point knocked the ball out from Braden Locke. It was ruled incomplete. And if he gets there a quarter second earlier, it's a fumble. Caused a false start from the right tackle one snap before that. He had a sack on 3rd and goal from like the 10 or so. Like if it is an obvious passing situation, he is like a problem. Had another one later with the around the right tackle, the one where they get called for a chop block, which shouldn't have been a penalty. You could have called a holding penalty there on the right tackle because he really kind of got the edge, and then he had the interception to on the tip pass to seal the game. You just saw the Ohio State defensive line get their hands up and really be disruptive against Tennessee. Oregon does a very good job with that as well. This was, I think they had a stat on the broadcast that they were second or first in the nation in tipped or deflected passes from the defensive line, on the season. So that, that's something that's going to be pretty disruptive. And then a couple guys, just a couple linebackers to know. Jeffrey Bassa, linebacker number 2, he made some really good plays in this game. There was one where they were running, I think, an end around or something like that. And he went from like one side of the field all the way to the other, ran the play down. It looked like, oh boy, this is going to be a big play, and turned into like a 3-yard gain. And Bryce Botcher, number 28, he, again, like another guy who goes really, really well sideline to sideline. Betcher, not Botcher. Betcher, he is also a baseball player at Oregon and was a 13th round draft pick from the Houston Astros. So quite an athlete there. Betcher wears number 2. Jeffrey Bassa wears Betcher wears number 28. Bassa wears number 2. But two guys who I think are people we have not talked about a whole heck of a lot, even after covering the first game. But I think a couple guys who could be important, especially in the run game, defending Ohio State, and in the, you leak Travion Henderson out of the backfield. That may be one of those guys, may be the one who's in charge of making that not be a problem for them.
Yeah, coming off of the Tennessee game where you're trying to watch some linebackers and there really aren't any, to this one, you got some hard hitting dudes. And Mateo Uiagalelei, really athletic. He's got some good bend, and he's got some good burst. And when he knows that there's a pass coming, he gets there. So it'll be interesting to see that matchup with him and Jordan Birch providing some pressure for Ohio State. I will say, my last thing, Tom, if you want to feel really good about Ohio State's chances, watch Oregon against Wisconsin immediately after watching Ohio State against Tennessee. And this is the wrong way to do it. This is going shopping when you're starving. You're going grocery shopping when you're starving, and you're just going to put everything in the cart, and you realize you get home and like, this is a lot of this is junk. A lot of this I should not have in this. So it was interesting, and it's a really, really interesting contrast. So that's why I'm looking forward to getting to the next one. And this was just I wouldn't say the salad portion, because we're talking about Wisconsin. So this is just maybe the cheese portion of the entire Oregon meal that we will have. So anything else, Tom?
No, just I would say that, we going through these previous times we've done this, like the Georgia before the Peach Bowl in 2022, you watch them play Oregon. That was a game that Oregon fans are probably not going to be real thrilled about remembering, where they just absolutely dismembered Oregon. And then you watch them play, I think it was Missouri and Kentucky, and these are like not good teams, and they're just absolutely dragging their butt up and down the carpet for 60 minutes. Like, oh, this is not great. So we'll have a nice mixture of This was the not good Oregon game. It should be a good Oregon game next, and then a high-scoring Oregon game against Penn State. So I'm looking forward to getting through some of those as well.
Yeah, definitely. So if you're new, hit the bell to be notified. If you're old, hit the bell to be notified. Subscribe to the channel if you have not. And we've got more. We're going to watch Washington. We're going to watch the Penn State game of these and review them, just like we did this one. And of course, we've got plenty of live stuff coming. Other shows, as you guys who know us have come to expect, when it's a big game, we're going to cover it in a big way. So continue to find us here at youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle and BuckeyeHuddle.com as well. So thank you all for tuning in, and we will talk to you guys later.